West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
All right, record-breaking cold temperatures have left millions without power and claimed more lives yesterday. At least 30 deaths have been reported, from car crashes to carbon monoxide poisoning, mainly throughout the South and Southeast. Texas has seen the most fatalities, as 2 million homes and businesses there are still without power in sub-freezing temperatures.
Oh my God, that's horrible.
A house fire killed a family of 4 in Houston as they appeared to be using a fireplace to keep warm. As Texas struggles through freezing temperatures and power outages, frozen wind turbines have caused conservative politicians to criticize the state's reliance on renewable energy. But the wind power actually only makes up a portion of the lost energy in Texas. Yesterday, an official with the Electric Reliability Council of Texas said that 16 gigawatts of renewable energy generation, mostly wind generation, was offline. However, nearly double that, 30 gigawatts, had been lost from thermal sources, which include gas, coal, and nuclear energy. And state energy officials and experts reported that the major outages in the power grid came from thermal sources, such as natural gas and coal, not renewable sources.
So, Willie, I know this will come as shock to nobody, but Greg Abbott's lying through his teeth when he's blaming renewables for the grid going down. The facts in his own state by the Texas government, by people who follow this show, he's just lying through his teeth. He can't blame AOC. He can't blame the new Green Deal. He can't blame renewable. It's all his fault, and all the fault of the Texas lawmakers who continued to underfund their energy infrastructure.
And what a strange instinct to, in the middle of this crisis with 4 million people out of power, as Mika just read, people dying in the state of Texas because they don't have any power and they don't have any heat, to rush onto Hannity and blame a congresswoman from New York for the Green New Deal, which doesn't exist. The governor of that state, it wasn't some pundit or a radio show host, the governor of the state, who's theoretically, ostensibly managing the crisis, rushes out to blame somebody else. Ted Cruz, a Texas senator, repeatedly has mocked power outages in California, now being criticized as Texas grapples with winter storms that have caused many to lose power. As we said, after being called out by The Hill, Senator Cruz owned up to his old tweet yesterday, tweeting, "I got no defense. A blizzard strikes Texas and our state shuts down. Not good." Texas Governor Abbott corrected criticism of the state's...
Good for him for owning up to that.
Yeah, he did. He did anyway. And Texas Governor Abbott corrected criticism of the state's power intake on Monday, tweeting that natural gas and coal generators also were responsible for the freeze. This, though, was before appearing on Fox News to blame the outages, as I said, on the Green New Deal.
This shows how the Green New Deal would be a deadly deal for the United States of America. Texas is blessed with multiple sources of energy, such as natural gas and oil and nuclear, as well as solar and wind. But you saw from what Trace said, and that is our wind and our solar got shut down, and they were collectively more than 10% of our power grid. It just shows that fossil fuel is necessary for the state of Texas as well as other states to make sure that we will be able to heat our homes in the wintertime and cool our homes in the summertime.
Wow. Just a breathtaking lie. Again, the official from the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, which runs the power plant, said most of the power knocked offline came from thermal sources, particularly natural gas. Most of the energy there, Joe, is from natural gas. The truth of the matter is they're not ready for temperatures. Their production facilities are not ready for temperatures like this, for this kind of extreme weather. Perhaps they should have been, which is another conversation. But the idea that frozen wind turbines blamed on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez caused this is a preposterous lie.
Well, it is a preposterous lie, and they could have prepared for it. They chose not to prepare for it, which, of course, is really galling. You know, it's also so just galling is, and I'm just thinking back to another Republican governor, Jeb Bush, when we would have terrible hurricanes coming through our state. You'd never see Jeb Bush on Fox News or CNN or MSNBC. No. When there was a crisis and people's lives were endangered, that was the only thing that Jeb Bush was focused on. And if he were to get on a channel, he wouldn't be assigning blame. He would say, stay in your homes. You can go to middle school X to get food here. He was constantly worried about the crisis on the ground. Here, Peter Baker, you have a governor in the middle of one of Texas's greatest crises in quite some time, where people are dying and millions are without heat in sub-freezing weather. He's going on a show to make ideological arguments. This looks like an extension of Donald Trump's government by gesture. If you can't govern, then just make gestures and attack, set up straw men and knock them down.
It is Wednesday, the 17th of February of 2021, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English Bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Will no one rid us of these meddlesome priests? Oh, yes. Hey, I got to tell you, I'm really jonesing for a really good Eggs Benedict. You're not going to get it in Texas. No, you got to have heat. You got to have heat to be able to make an Eggs Benedict properly. So I go back and forth on making jokes about Texas because people are dying in Texas, but on the other hand, making jokes about the inept GQP leadership. Yeah, they've turned into the GQP when they were merely the GOP. They did enough already, and now look at them. I love the absolute gaslighting and propaganda. What's the first thing that they do? What's the first thing that Abbott does? Does he tell his people, hang in there, we'll get it fixed? No, he goes on Fox to blame New York. Well, a brown woman from New York. And some sort of weird colored people's New Deal. What's that all about? Green New Deal. Oh, my God. And unfortunately, there are enough people on their side that just laugh that stuff up because it sounds true to them. Windmills frozen? Well, that makes sense. Yeah. Think about, having blizzards in the Midwest. Little House on the Prairie. Did their windmills freeze? It's just ludicrous. It's stupid. There are 3 windmills in Antarctica generating power for a research lab there, that generates power 24/7, 365 with no problems. We're talking the Antarctic. Pretty cold there. Gee, a lot of wind. I don't know how a wind turbine would work in the wind. And the only reason that a total of 3 wind turbines froze is because the generator of that site decided to buy the cheap blades that would get ice. And they didn't really freeze. They just went into a cavitating problem. And if you let that go on too long, the whole thing will collapse and fall apart because it's out of balance. Yeah, you don't want any cavitation on a propeller. So, yeah, the magic of the market just shows how cheap people will be. I love the other confession that they made about Texas being a deregulated or unregulated state is that you can't expect companies to do the right thing. Obviously, it's a business, right? How else was PG&E in California able to blow up San Bruno or cause the whole state to catch on fire? Yeah, it was cheaper not to do the work and charge people for it anyway. And that's exactly what Texas magic marketeers did with their energy grid. We're not going to bury these lines deep enough to keep them from freezing. We'll just put them on top of the ground in many cases. Why not? You know, it does get cold in Texas. I don't know why people think that Texas is just hot all the time. It can get damn cold. And I've been in Texas when there was snow around. You know, maybe not piled up for feet, but still. The only reason that they didn't do it is because of the same reason they have unregulated fertilizer plants exploding and taking out whole communities. Maybe Abbott was expecting a few unregulated fertilizer plants to explode to keep people warm, and they just didn't. Damn. That means those fertilizer plant operators illegally upgraded their safety measures. You know, that probably is not allowed in Texas. Not with GQP governors ruling the roost. I don't want to make jokes about Texas and how Ted Cruz, loaded on Californians. We don't do that. But we will point a finger at the Ted Cruz types and the Abbott types and all the rest of their types. All hat and no soul. None whatsoever. Well, that's only part of what's going on in the world, isn't it? Jeez. You know, if you've been following the Navalny protests, those are getting a little bit under Putin's craw. Yeah, so check that out. I think that those people are quite brave. Now, I also want to make mention that Navalny is not Superman and Mr. Perfect. He does harbor a few, shall we say, racist sentiments. But maybe he'll become enlightened. Maybe. Let's hope. Okay? Let's hope. Because what that guy's gone through is uncalled for. That's another thing that just came to mind. I was thinking, now how I'm making these associations, I apologize. I just don't like violence in our politics. I don't want violence to determine, succession of power, for instance. So when George Wallace got shot, I didn't. And I don't know anybody that celebrated that. Yeah, we hated Wallace. He was a bigot and a racist. A bat-carrying bigot. Screw him. But we don't do that in America. We don't shoot people to get our way. And yet, we have the likes of a Squeaky Burbert. We got governors like Ron DeSantis. Any number of those types of governors. They don't care about the rule of law. They want to be bullies. They want their way. For some reason, they think that they are pure of mind and heart, and that they have been, destined by God to rule. And all the rest of us are just a bunch of mud people, and we got to be kept in line. We can't allow those people to have a say in government. What does that say about us? Yeah. That's right. You give somebody a little bit of soul, that means in the conservative mind you're losing some of yours. Well, I would argue you can only lose your soul if you have one to begin with. And I'm not so sure that any of those types have ever exhibited a soul with a capital S. Okay, well, we could go on and on and on about that. And I have been for quite a while here in these opening rants, so why don't we discuss what is curated for you today here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Well, at the top, of course, I was starting off about how Abbott and Ted Cruz also, they both lied through their teeth, lied when they blamed the new Green Deal that doesn't even exist. Think of that. It doesn't even exist. Well, neither do baby-eating pedophiles in the Democratic leadership, like Hillary and all those. That doesn't exist. Even the basement at Comet Pizza doesn't exist. But people are still going there and want to shoot the place up because of the baby-eating pedophiles from Podesta and Hillary. Babies don't go good with pizza. It goes better with Podesta's risotto. Come on. Okay. Well, on the rest of the menu, a black franchise owner who also happened to be a player for the Oakland A's, a designated runner. They used to do that. Was he doing that then? A black franchise owner sued MacDonald's, citing persistent bias. The SEC sued Morningstar Credit Ratings for violating U.S. security laws in its ratings of commercial mortgage-backed securities. And you don't do that. You can get in big trouble for that. And Biden is urged to end the Trump lawsuit, blocking $2.3 billion in payments to some 300,000 aged, blind, and disabled Puerto Ricans. Well, it's about time. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where thousands of protesters took over Barcelona's streets to demand the release of a rapper jailed on charges of rapping insults at the Spanish royalty. And Japan's ruling party wants more women at its meetings, unless they talk. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the right of the page, right there by the social media scroll, by the way, is our chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. If you would then take a look across the page near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, hopefully then you will notice the link to our Patreon site. That is there, of course, because everything costs money. Even the Texas power grid is charging people more. Well, they're not actually charging them now. They're tabulating it. All the extra dollars they're spending on kilowatts because of their, market-driven energy grid will be passed on to the ratepayer. So, as they say, nothing comes for free. And they're going to charge you more the more you hurt. So, of course, we need a little bit of help in paying our bills as well, and we've been able to do it because of generosity from folks like you. And you out there who continue to be so generous, thank you. Oh, my gosh. You would think like a little powerhouse of resistance wouldn't really cost that much, but like I say, they keep raising the costs. Oh, damn them. And machinery has to be purchased, and software has to be as well. And if you could afford an espresso-type coffee drink, like some others have, and send those funds our way once a month, we are able to stretch those dollars, put that in the kitty, pay our bills, fly under the radar, and continue resisting as the founders originally intended. Thank you for your generosity. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. Thanks, Tom, for doing that, or taking care of that, and doing so much more, too. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Kos. Otherwise, why would it be called a diary? You know, they're trying to move away from that and call them stories. Au contraire, it will be a diary. Okay. Anyway, I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Kos about 10 minutes before showtime. Get that posted up on social media platforms like Twitter and other platforms too, because that's what we do. So check out the show notes and links, because that's where the core stories are, without all the flair. Follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West, and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and really wherever podcasts can be found. I would say ubiquitous, but I don't know if I can. It's still early in the morning, and I still need another cup of coffee. Don't we all? Let us now tuck into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. It's a tasty little morsel about MacDonald's. Yeah. And Mark Gillespie of the Associated Press does bring us this first offering. The black owner of 14 McDonald's franchises says the company has shown more favorable treatment to white owners and denied him the opportunity to buy restaurants in more affluent communities, according to a civil rights lawsuit filed yesterday, Tuesday, in federal court in Youngstown. The lawsuit, filed by Herbert Washington, a former Michigan State University track star who played for 2 seasons with the Oakland Athletics in the mid-'70s, said the Chicago-based company's discriminatory practices has led to a $700,000 sales gap between black-owned franchises and those owned by white people. Franchises in low-income neighborhoods cost more to operate, have higher employee turnover, and are not as profitable, the lawsuit said. By regulating black owners to the oldest stores in the toughest neighborhoods, McDonald's ensured the black franchisees would never achieve the levels of success that white franchisees could expect, the lawsuit said. Black franchisees must spend more to operate their stores, while white franchisees get to realize the full benefit of their labors. I would say that's a feature, not a bug. More than 50 former black McDonald's franchise owners made similar claims in 2 Washingtons in a lawsuit filed against the company in September, saying they were forced to sell around 200 stores in the last decade. Washington said he has been fighting a 2-tiered system since he bought his first franchise in Rochester, New York 40 years ago. He at one point owned 27 restaurants, and he was forced then by McDonald's to sell 7 stores over the last 7 years to white owners. Reuters staff, mysteriously at Reuters, brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, affectionately known as the SEC, sued Morningstar Credit Ratings LLC yesterday, Tuesday, for allegedly, Reuters uses that word a lot now, don't they? Allegedly violating U.S. securities law in its ratings of commercial mortgage-backed securities, the regulator said in a statement. Morningstar's credit ratings business allegedly, there's that word again, violated disclosure and internal controls requirements in 30 commercial mortgage-backed securities transactions from 2015 to 2016, when the agency allowed analysts to make undisclosed adjustments to key stresses in its modeling, the SEC said. A spokesperson for Morningstar said the firm had complied with all regulatory requirements because what else are they going to say? And the complaint related to methodology. It had, voluntarily retired in 2018 after they had got caught, apparently, you'd think, eh? The SEC had also not alleged any investor harm. Really? You mean investors benefited from the cheat? Ratings agencies came under criticism after the U.S. financial crisis as inflated ratings of mortgage-backed securities helped fuel a U.S. housing bubble. In the wake of the crisis, Congress charged the SEC with overseeing the ratings agency, but the agency struggled with the oversight due to insufficient resources and technology changes, as Reuters previously reported. Morningstar previously paid a $3.5 million settlement to settle SEC charges violating conflict of interest rules designed to separate credit ratings and analysis from sales and marketing. U.S. laws require ratings agencies to disclose their ratings methodologies. I'll get it out, it's still early, and stick to those frameworks. But according to the SEC's allegations, Morningstar analysts frequently made undisclosed adjustments to lower the stress applied to their models. Those changes benefited issuers that had paid for the ratings, allowing them to pay investors less interest, the SEC said. The lawsuit was filed by the Southern District of New York against Morningstar Credit Ratings LLC. And in an obvious attempt to dodge culpability in their nefarious scheme, Morningstar Inc. now operates credit ratings through its subsidiary DBRS Morningstar, obviously doing business really secretly. Morningstar. Andrea Shalal of Reuters brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Top faith leaders from across the U.S. yesterday, Tuesday, urged President Joe Biden, I love saying that, to immediately withdraw a lawsuit filed by his predecessor, you know who, to block $2.3 billion in supplemental income payments to some 300,000 aged, blind, and disabled Puerto Ricans. Catholic Archbishop Roberto Gonzalez of San Juan, the head of Catholic Charities USA, and leaders from other churches also called on Biden to use executive orders and back congressional action to attract more pharmaceutical and other manufacturing jobs to the Caribbean island, a U.S. territory of 3.2 million people hit hard by the COVID-19 pandemic, let alone what they were hit in terms of hurricanes years ago. Trump just decided he didn't like brown people because he hated Puerto Ricans when he was in New York. He let those sentiments be known publicly, in fact. It was no secret. The Biden administration should also free up more disaster relief for the island and expand federal programs such as the Nutrition Assistance Program and Medicare. Nearly 60% of Puerto Rico's children, who are U.S. citizens, live in poverty and would benefit from these measures, they wrote in a letter delivered to the White House on Tuesday. Puerto Rico was already reeling from bankruptcy, severe earthquakes, and 2 devastating 2017 hurricanes, Irma and Maria, when the pandemic hit. The signers welcomed the Biden administration's release of some hurricane recovery funds, but said $50 billion more was needed. Biden campaigned against the current untenable situation in Puerto Rico and pledged to boost federal aid, end discriminatory practice, and rebuild the island's significantly deficient infrastructure. But his administration has not scrapped the Justice Department's lawsuit under Trump to block an April 2020 federal appeals court ruling allowing eligible Puerto Ricans to apply for supplemental Social Security benefits. The Justice Department declined to comment, and no comment was immediately available from the White House. Well, that takes us to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, Unearthed. Recently, the online assets of the park at Britain's Sutton Hoo excavation site started receiving hits like never before. The reason? The release of the motion picture The Dig, which recounts how the archaeological site came into prominence just as the Second World War was commencing. At first glance, a story about digging in the dirt could summon up allusions to boredom, though we've had hero archaeologists before, Indiana Jones. Here, though, the story isn't interlaced with the supernatural to drive box office. Rather, it's an understated narrative of the uncovering of the most significant piece of Anglo-Saxon history, the burial ship Sutton Hoo. Our protagonist is the sharp but non-formally educated Basil Brown, played by Ralph Fiennes, who's hired by the estate's owner, Carey Mulligan's Edith Pretty, to investigate several large mounds on her property. The mounds are thought by academics to be of the relatively common Viking variety. Brown isn't so sure, though, and leaves a nearby dig of an old Roman villa to pursue the mounds more closely. And yeah, he pursues Edith some too, but in that suppressed Victorian way where things never really happen. Once the project's importance is recognized, a pompous character played by the wonderful Ken Stott shows up to take over, along with additional archaeologists and an additional romantic subplot. The story, from England's beginnings, unfolds as its future is in doubt. We see warplanes overhead. The Dig is about juxtaposition, timelessness and urgency in plot and subplots, and about recognizing Basil Brown's part in the project. His name wasn't even mentioned by the British Museum in its initial artifact displays. Cinematic license is taken to be sure with respect to some characters, but this one stays close to the 06 book on which it's based and is a satisfying watch. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at Take2MovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Jason Goldman. The cheetah is the rarest big cat in Africa. Less than 7,000 adults remain on the planet. Think of it this way. For every cheetah on the planet, there's more than 4 Starbucks coffee shops. The most important cheetah stronghold is in central Namibia, but the cheetahs there don't live within national parks. They live on privately owned farmland.
There were farmers having huge problems with cheetahs, losing a lot of livestock, and there were other farmers who actually didn't have any problem at all.
Ecologist Jörg Melsheimer from the Leibniz Institute for Zoo and Wildlife Research in Berlin assumed at first that all farmers had cheetah trouble. It was just that some were more likely to complain about it. But after tracking 50 collared cheetahs, he began to suspect that there really was a pattern to their killing. By the time his team had data from 106 cheetahs collared over the course of a decade, not only was he certain that cheetahs were more likely to kill in some places than in others, but that he could solve the problem.
We indeed found these communication hubs of cheetahs, which are spread evenly across the landscape, with a high activity of cheetahs within the hubs.
Cheetahs are an asocial species, but they still need to trade information.
They don't meet physically, typically not, but they leave marks at prominent landmarks where they either use urine or feces to communicate with each other.
Think of it as a coffee shop for cats, where animals trade gossip. Even though these communication hubs only comprise around 10% of the landscape, cheetahs spend most, sometimes all, of their time within them.
This is basically a long-term tradition, which is passed on from cheetah generation to cheetah generation. Some of these communication hubs are basically known, or let's say the marking locations, the marking trees were known by farmers for 60, 70 years. Like the grandfather of the current farmer already knew the marking trees in this area.
What the farmers never realized is that only some farms overlap with the cheetah's communication hubs. Melsheimer thought that if those farmers relocated their most vulnerable herds, it could be a huge help. He remembers the first farmer he tried to convince.
And I told him, look, Wilfried, I have the idea that they are actually there because of these marking trees, and you happen to have your small calves exactly in the same area. Let's try to move your herds out of this area and keep them somewhere else, and then let's measure the losses. And he was laughing at me. He said, yeah, okay, nice idea, but I'm not sure whether this is going to work. They will probably follow the calves. So we tried this, and actually it worked. And he earned much more money because he lost less calves.
After that, 35 more farmers agreed to try it out. In all, the number of calves lost to cheetah predation fell by a whopping 86%. Of course, some cattle outside of communication hubs were still lost to cheetahs, but it was at a low enough level that most farmers seemed to tolerate it. What this means is that cheetahs aren't actively following the cattle. They simply take advantage of whatever food is available nearby. If it's not cattle, then they go after wild ungulates like springbok or oryx or kudu. There are no so-called problem cheetahs who intentionally seek out cattle. Instead, there are problem areas. That's a much easier problem to solve, and it's one that doesn't result in farmers killing cheetahs. Melsheimer is now hard at work collecting tracking data from cheetahs in other parts of Africa to see whether his findings hold up in other ecosystems. So often it seems as if the goals of wildlife conservation are incompatible with the goals of commerce. But this story reveals that, in fact, biodiversity and agriculture can coexist.
Our case is really one of these nice examples where it can go hand in hand.
Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Jason Goldman.
This is an important message from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. When it snows this winter, make sure you clear more than your driveway. Before you hit the road and before you get in the driver's seat, check to be sure that your vehicle's tailpipe is clear of snow. If the tailpipe is blocked, carbon monoxide, an odorless, colorless, and deadly gas produced by your engine can build up quickly inside your vehicle, poisoning anyone inside. To learn more, call 1-800-CDC-INFO. That's 1-800-232-4636.
In 2012 in the United States, about 317,000 motor vehicle crashes involved a large truck. 26,000 truck drivers and their passengers were injured in these crashes, and about 700 died. Trucker safety requires an alert, buckled-up, experienced driver with a reliable vehicle and a strong employer safety program. Seat belts are the most effective way to prevent an injury or death in a motor vehicle crash, but in 2013, 1 in 6 drivers of large trucks didn't use their seat belts. Employers can help truck drivers stay safe by committing to driver safety programs at the highest level of leadership, establishing and enforcing driver safety policies, including requiring everyone in the truck to buckle up, and addressing factors that contribute to crashes, such as drowsy and distracted driving. To learn more, visit cdc.gov/vital signs.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
For an expectant mother, taking care of her developing baby means taking good care of herself. One way she can do this is by ensuring she gets vaccinated. If a woman is or might be pregnant during flu season, it's especially important to get her annual flu shot, preferably before the end of October. In addition, women should be vaccinated against whooping cough during the 3rd trimester of each pregnancy. Failure to get vaccinated places both mother and baby at increased risk for serious complications of these infections, including hospitalization and even death. If you're pregnant or planning to get pregnant, ask your healthcare provider when you should get your vaccines. Thank you for joining us on A Minute of Health with CDC.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Sweetie, want some fruit?
You have to use the right tool for the job. A power drill is the wrong tool to slice fruit. Just like an antibiotic is the wrong tool to treat viruses, including colds and flu. Antibiotics are only needed for certain bacterial infections. When they aren't needed, antibiotics won't help you, and the side effects could still hurt you. Ask your healthcare professional when an antibiotic is the right tool and when it's not. Visit cdc.gov/antibiotic-use.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Could a senator who believed that Donald Trump incited the insurrection at the Capitol also vote against impeachment? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. Moments after Senator Mitch McConnell voted to acquit Donald Trump, he stood on the Senate floor and said this: January 6th, American citizens attacked their own government. They beat and bloodied our own police. They stormed the Senate floor. They tried to hunt down the Speaker of the House. They built a gallows and chanted about murdering the Vice President. They did this because they had been fed wild falsehoods by the President. There is no question that President Trump is practically and morally responsible for provoking the events of that day. Notwithstanding these conclusions, Senator McConnell had voted against impeachment, claiming that because Trump no longer held office, he could not be impeached. That's a position that most constitutional scholars disagree with, and that the Senate had rejected with its 55-45 vote against the motion to dismiss. But Senator McConnell could assert this position and, of course, vote as he chose. That's because the Senate rules, while requiring the senators to take an oath that as jurors in an impeachment trial, they will, quote, do impartial justice according to the Constitution and laws. What that oath means, ultimately, is what any individual senator says it means. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU, because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1936. That was the day more rubber workers sat down in Akron, Ohio. Tire builders in Goodyear's plant number 2, Department 251A, sat down when 700 co-workers were laid off. Goodyear had been running 4 6-hour shifts. They hoped to reduce the workforce by implementing 3 8-hour shifts with no increase in pay. Management moved quickly to fire all of the strikers. By this day, all 4,000 workers at Goodyear voted to strike over the layoffs and firings, the speed-ups, and the new shift hours and pay. The enormous 11-mile facility was immediately shut down. In his book, Strike, historian Jeremy Breacher indicates that few, if any, were union members. The United Rubber Workers Union was hesitant to associate itself with the sit-down. Rubber workers organized themselves. They set up 24-hour pickets at dozens of gates, built striker shanties, and set their demands. After 6 days, the United Rubber Workers Union sanctioned the strike. Breacher described the scene writing, quote, "The company secured an injunction against mass picketing. 10,000 tradespeople from across the city gathered with lead pipe and baseball bats to stop 150 sheriff's deputies from opening the plants. The Summit County Central Labor Council guaranteed a general strike if Law and Order League vigilantes carried out their threatened March 18th attack on picket lines. The vigilante movement was paralyzed. Federal mediators demanded a return to work and arbitration. Workers responded, no, 1,000 times no. I'd rather die than say yes. Finally, Goodyear capitulated on most of the demands, except formal recognition of the union. Rubber workers returned to work largely victorious. After renewed struggles, workers finally won union recognition a year later.
This is Solidarity News on Radio Labour.
This is a Radio Labour report recorded on Wednesday, February 17th, 2021. I'm Mark Belanger. While the renewable energy sector continues to grow dramatically, there are many workers employed in the energy sector who are not ready for the transition. This is especially true in Australia, where coal is an important export. To explore the challenges facing these and other workers, the global union Industrial organized a webinar on energy transition. Industrial represents more than 50 million union members working in the supply chains of the mining, manufacturing, and energy sectors. It has just released a major report on the transition taking place towards green, sustainable energy. One of the participants in the webinar was Peter Coley, the National Research Director for Australia's CFMEU union.
Australia is in the unusual situation, developed country, but its main export industries are minerals and energy. We're the biggest coal exporter in the world. So what we're dealing with here is not just a domestic transition issue, but our international trade transition, because the coal industry is Australia's second largest export industry after iron ore, and the LNG industry is the next largest exporter. So our international trade is based on fossil fuels. So very big challenge for Australia here. Now this union, my union, is mostly in coal mining. We do have a maritime division which has workers that are in oil and gas, offshore oil and gas, but the big chunk of our membership is in coal mining. Now, what the report said was very interesting to me, essentially saying that the unions in oil and gas know very little about just transition, and they also have the view that the oil and gas industry is going to continue on quite strongly for quite a long time. And the oil companies themselves often think that. A key issue was that the oil and gas companies are likely not talking to their workers about the possibility of fossil fuel decline or the requirement for transition for the workers. So it's all going to come as a bit of a surprise when it happens. And this is the experience in coal mining, I think. And we have the problem that where it's not talked about and where it's not discussed a long way in advance, there's quite a lot of denialism. Now, in Australia, we have the situation that we've had a lot of big climate debates in Australia. We even call them the climate wars. And about 20% of the Australian population do not believe that global warming is a problem. So that's the sort of level of, dissension, lack of consensus on the need to address global warming. But what we face in Australia is a situation that domestic coal power is already strongly in decline. Fundamentally, not because of government policy, but mostly because of the improving economics of renewables. Australia is actually very rich in solar power and in wind. We were the developed country that was most reliant in the entire world on coal. I think we had 85% of our power came from coal. It's now already dropped to 70%. It's widely expected to drop down to 50% or less in just 10 years. And it could well be a great deal more reduction than that. So we have a situation where our coal power workers accept the need for transition because the owners of the coal power stations already have put closure dates on all their stations. Required by law in Australia now, you have to have a closure date. And so that's already been announced. So the coal power workers are interested in transition and very alive to the issue, and we are doing negotiations around collective bargaining agreements around redundancies and retraining and relocation. But we've just had the announcement just in the last few months that Japan and Korea will both have net zero emissions by 2050, and China announced it will seek to have net zero emissions by 2060. Now, those three countries account for 75% of Australia's coal exports. So we can expect coal exports to start declining in Australia sooner than we thought, I think within 5 years.
And that's it. International labor news you can use. Thank you for listening. And remember, it's all about global solidarity.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 28 degrees Fahrenheit with an expected high of only about 44 degrees today. Foggy conditions, actually heavy foggy conditions, are currently in order and will be generally cloudy throughout the day with winds light and variable. Overcast tonight, lows in the low to mid 30s, winds light and variable, with rain overnight, or actually rain earlier in the morning, and then heavier rain throughout the day with a high in the mid-40s, winds light and variable, expecting about a half of an inch tomorrow. Confirmed coronavirus cases in Jackson County in the southern part of Oregon have now increased to 7,953, with confirmed deceased remaining at 106. Pollen continues to be rated none here in Rogue River proper. The air quality index is good for the region at 29 parts per million, and the daytime UV index is moderate at 3. Barometric pressure is falling at 30.4 inches. Visibility is down to 0.06 miles. And relative humidity is 100%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 51 degrees with rain. Paris is 56 and mostly cloudy. Rome is 54 and partly cloudy. Kyiv is 16 degrees and mostly cloudy. Kabul is 48 with its wintertime smoke. Hong Kong is 61 with light rain. Tokyo is 38 degrees and clear. Sydney, Australia is 70 and mostly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 44 degrees and sunny. And New York, New York is a freezing 25 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Guillermo Martinez and Nacho Doce of Reuters brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Thousands of protesters took over some of Barcelona's streets last night to demand the release of a rapper arrested by Spanish police after being given a jail sentence on charges of glorifying terrorism and insulting royalty in his songs. Dozens of police stormed Lleida University in northeastern Spain and earlier in the day and arrested rapper Pablo Hasél after he had barricaded himself there. Hasél, known for his radical leftist views, missed a deadline last Friday to surrender to police to serve a 9-month jail term handed down in 2018. A sentence that caused an uproar in Spain and led the government to announce it would make free speech laws less restrictive, but they still had to throw the rapper in jail. Hasél was convicted over lyrics and tweets that included references to the Basque separatist paramilitary group ETA, compared Spanish judges to Nazis, and called former King Juan Carlos a mafia boss. After Hasél's arrest, Deputy Prime Minister Carmen Calvo told reporters that jailing people over matters of freedom of speech should not happen in a democracy like Spain. Hasél took refuge at the university with a group of supporters. They clashed briefly with police yesterday morning, throwing chairs and emptying fire extinguishers before officers carrying guns and wearing protective headgear apprehended Hasél.
Je te donne, c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Jumeen Park and Shangron Kim of Reuters brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Japan's ruling Liberal Democratic Party, long seen as a homogeneous redoubt of elderly men, now wants more women at its key meetings, provided they don't do the talking. The party, in power for most of the time since 1955, has proposed allowing 5 female lawmakers to join its board meetings as observers in response to criticism that its board is dominated by men. 2 of the party's 12-member board are women, while only 3 of its 25-member general council are women. The proposal comes after sexist comments from former Tokyo Olympics chief Yoshiro Mori, himself a member of the group and a one-time prime minister, sparked a global outcry and renewed attention on gender disparity in the world's third-largest economy. The move would allow more female LDP members to see how decisions were being made, said Toshiro Nakai, the party's 82-year-old Secretary General. He said he had heard criticism the board's elected body was dominated by men. It's important to fully understand what kind of discussions are happening, he told a news conference late yesterday, Tuesday. take a look, is what it is about. Those female observers would not be able to speak during the meetings, but could submit opinions separately to the Secretariat office. Well. That brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day. But you do know Netroots Radio will broadcast on. And we're going to meet up tomorrow for Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here, in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goer. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.